Welcome to today's presentation on I have all object authority and I'm not afraid to use it. Today we're going to review how vulnerable it makes your system. My name is Amy Williams. I'm a senior security services consultant at Fortra, and my primary responsibility is helping customers remediate their systems from different security vulnerabilities, all object being number one on that list. So let's start at the beginning. What are user profiles? User profiles are an object on the IBMI of a user profile type. They are what define the capabilities each user has on your system, whether that's a service profile or an actual person that's using your system that you've allowed to authenticate. Now, this is in addition to the supplied IBM profiles that come with the system. QSEC Offer, for example, or QBRMS if you've installed that application. When we look at a user profile, there's three primary types. You have user profiles. Group profiles are also those user profiles. And that's typically what we think of when we think of the user. Now, there are two additional common types, and that is service tool users. They're used to access the low-level parts of the system and do deep-level traces. And then validation list users that are most often used for maintaining web applications and authorization to those web applications. Today, we are strictly going to focus ourselves on that user profile type object. So we're going to cover all of the configurations to a user profile, how all object is granted, how all object is proliferated throughout your system, and where you need to look to identify if user profiles actually have all object authority, because there's many different ways they can acquire it. A powerful user is a user profile that has special authorities, could have private authority to specific objects on the system that could elevate their profile, or a system where public authority is pervasive as having change or more authority to objects, and having a way to execute those commands or command line access. The special authorities on the system consist of 8 different special authorities, all object being the most unrestricted access. It allows users to access any other object on the system unimpeded. If the profile has all object, it will have access to the object on the system, no matter the security on that object. Next, we want to talk about SecAdmin. This is the special authority that allows a user profile to manage other user profiles, regardless if that profile has all object authority or not. But you must have private authorities to those user profiles, and most often ownership. IOSysConfig allows you to administer configurations, creating devices, creating lines, controllers. Any of those TCP communication devices require IOSysConfig to be created. It also permits you to create shares. Audit, special authority, allows you to control if the entire system has auditing turned on and things are being logged to your audit journal. It also allows you to control auditing of specific objects or user profiles. Audit's a very powerful tool. Spool control, one of the most commonly granted special authorities, is really the all object authority of spooled files. If you have any proprietary information, be it customer lists, pricing lists, contracts, that are being printed out into spooled files, know that users with spool control can see those. The service special authority should be the least granted special authority across your system. It not only allows a user to start service tools, but it can also allow them to start a trace on the system that could expose sensitive information in communications. Job control is another special authority that is granted across most user profiles. And what many people don't know is that job control not only can allow a user to shut down the system by ending subsystems and ending any other job in the system, it also can grant access to spooled files. Safe sys can be a danger of exfiltration of data. SaveSys grants a user authority to be able to save any object on the system, whether they have authority to it or not. They can then take those objects they've saved and restore them to another system and have authority to them. So you're in the business of risk as soon as you turn on that system. So your users have virtual keys to your data. Do you really trust them to drive it all on their own with no guardrails, no guidance? Are you really willing to risk your entire business or career on granting them all object authority and full access to everything your business runs on? Each year, Fortune publishes the State of IBMI Security Study. The statistics are compiled from anonymous data submitted by our security scan tool. And year over year, we continue to see many of the same trends and risky configurations. Where we will see some improvements, you'll also see where some of the data shows that the configurations are getting riskier. The study is available for you to download and provides an overview of how well IBMI systems are configured. Now, I want to share with you some of those results. And later on, we'll review how you can correct some of these configurations and the most common vulnerabilities. In reviewing dormant accounts or inactive profiles, on average, there are 126 inactive profiles, and 76 of those profiles were still enabled. But the highest end, there were 424 inactive profiles, and 279 of them were enabled. This is a fairly high statistic and very common. You can use the Analyze Profile Activity right on the IBMI to be able to take action against those profiles. Another item that we always want to be looking at is default passwords. Password security should be top of our list. We've talked a lot about complexity rule changes. We've talked a lot about changing password frequency. But when it comes down to it, having a default password or a password that was supplied by a vendor left in place can be extremely risky because there's nothing to guess once you have that user profile. So when we look at special authorities, which is the real topic of today's discussion, we can see that all object is still, on average, 122 user profiles are being granted all object on user systems. And if you think that all object is truly an administrative authority, and only administrators should have that authority on your systems, how many shops have 122 administrators? Or even more than 3? So when we start looking at these numbers year over year, our target is to have as close to 10 user profiles having a special authority granted as possible. And you can see we're nowhere close to that target. But there has been improvement. So like I said, we see improvement across the board, except for job control and SaveSys. And these two special authorities, even though they're not generally on our radar and we're not looking at them, and they certainly don't grant you what all object does, but with job control, you can bring down the system by ending subsystems or ending critical jobs that are very important to your day-to-day business processes. And SaveSys can allow a user to gain access to proprietary data. So when we consider those and we look at all objects, SecAdmin, and Audit, which are probably the top 3 that we want to ensure beyond a doubt being issued to only those very specific profiles, they're still well above the ideal level, though Audit is getting better and better every year, and people are starting to pay more attention to who can control logging of events on their IBMI systems. So let's get back to basics. A profile and a password is often the only thing that's protecting your system from being breached or being misused. Don't make those mistakes anymore that the users aren't going to figure it out. There are things out there that are going to help them figure it out and help them think of what they can do. Remember that you've already given them access to the system. Using multi-factor authentication, especially for your administrators, is another way to ensure only those users that should access your system are. Security by obscurity is no longer something that we can work with. Everyone has a password and a login. They're familiar with using computers. They are going to be able to access these things that you never intended them to. And if they want to figure it out, the information is available to them. Black Hat has the topic focused on IBMI each and every year. So it's not that system that nobody knows about anymore. At the most basic level, at the system level, there are system values that control the complexity rules for your passwords and how those passwords have to be maintained are all within the QPWD system values. So doing a work sysval and familiarizing yourself with what those settings and configurations are is a great first step to know how much work you may have or not have to do on improving your posture for password maintenance. One of the first steps you want to do is establish an actual policy around the user profiles you're going to be creating. What job roles those user profiles are going to be in. What data access rules those job roles should have. Don't allow every user to have access to all of the data. They generally don't need access to everything to be able to perform their jobs. And once you've put these things in place and that identification work is done, moving forward with compliance and ensuring things are well maintained is a much easier job. Consider using template profiles rather than just copying a similar user profile. The difference between template profiles and copying another user's profiles is that very often user profiles get changed throughout their life cycle. They may change jobs. You may have granted temporary special authorities. And if that copy happens at an inadvertent time, you'll be granting a new user authorities you never intended. So when you're setting up a new profile, you have to have SecAdmin, and we talked about this before. SecAdmin is that special authority that allows you to manipulate user profiles on the system. However, there is a safeguard built into the OS where you cannot grant anything that you don't have. So your identity management team will require having access to user profiles that have the special authorities if there are required special authorities to be granted to other user profiles. Naming conventions, and I think this has probably been one of the hottest, most contentious topics in many shops over the last few years. What is that naming convention and why should there be a naming convention? And it is all across the board. I know I myself have experienced a number of different formats. But one to think about is using the department or location the user is from with their name in combination. This will help you identify the user profiles and where they're from, but not necessarily easily guessable. The user profile parameters, even though you've set some at the system level, there are specifics that we need to take into consideration when creating certain types of user profiles. Number one, no default passwords, and you'll hear this throughout the presentation. I will harp on no default passwords. For group profiles, set those passwords to none. Set their status to disabled. They don't need access to the system. Limit their capabilities. Additionally, IBM has heard our concerns, and in v7r5, they've actually changed the default for the create user profile command, where that default password is now set to none and not the user profile. Additionally, IBM has also changed the defaults for a number of their shipped profiles to star none, where they used to have a default password. So if you are running an older migrated system and you've been carrying forward those configurations over and over again throughout your upgrades, you may have these conditions still in your system. Using the Analyze Default Password command that's built right into the OS will allow you to create a listing of all of those profiles that have those default passwords. And even prior to those changes, IBM in 6.1 and 7.2 introduced enhancements to the password rules to limit the profile name from being able to be included anywhere within the password, and in 7.2 prevented administrators from being able to bypass those complexity rules. So with the all create change and the limit profile name combination in those password rules, you can truly prevent passwords from being set to default or not meeting your complexity rules. Setting a password to expire is best practice, especially on newly created profiles. But don't solely rely on this control because you don't know for sure who that first user actually is going to be that logs into it. So make sure you're not using that same password for all new user profiles, because once they know it the first time, now they know it for any other new users. And be aware that you can't expire a password of *none. Along with expiring a password for first-time use of a user profile, you also want to expire passwords on a regular basis. There is both the system value that will be set for all users on the system, but you can also override that value on a per-user basis. So if you have application or service profiles that you don't want to have that process break in the middle of the afternoon on a Friday, set those to no max, but ensure that you're still rotating those passwords regularly, along with all of your user profiles. So at the system level, if you've set that users can't reuse the same password more than 32 times, using that in conjunction with the password change block value that can both be set at the system and at the user profile to ensure they can't change their password for a certain number of hours, will help ensure that they don't sit and hit that F9 key that we all know about to change your password 32 times to get back to that original password. I've had this happen in shops that I've inherited, where users knew how many times they needed to change their password to be able to get back to the same password they'd been using for years. It basically made the changing of the password interval ineffective completely. Introducing the change password block to prevent them from being able to change it, even for a few hours, absolutely deterred this type of behavior. Another best practice is to turn on the previous sign-on information screen. This will prevent a screen letting the user know when the previous sign-on for that user profile they're using to authenticate to your system with was used to sign on. This is especially important for your administrators. They should know, absolutely without a doubt, when the last time their profile signed on to the system. So it can be an alert if their profile has been compromised. Additionally, we can secure our number of interactive sessions our users are able to use by using the limit device session. Now, this value has taken on a new role since v6r1 because previously it was an on or off switch. You either had one session or you had unlimited number of sessions. At v6r1, they enhanced this value, so now you can have anywhere from 1 to up to 9 sessions simultaneously. You can set this both at the system level or at individual user levels. We are finding more and more often that companies are setting this to a value of 5 or 6, and it is helping to deter the sharing of user profiles and passwords. Specifying a value of disabled for a user profile only prevents it from being able to authenticate to the system. It does not prevent it from being able to run a job either from the job scheduler or through your application programs. So when you're setting up these interfaces, if you're setting up nightly batch processes and the user profile doesn't need to be authenticated to, set those profiles up to have a password of none and set their status to disabled. The jobs will run normally in batch. And using the QMAX sign and QMAX sign action system values to ensure that bad password attempts disable a profile automatically is a great way to prevent the abuse or the breach of user profiles. Now, in the unfortunate event, if QSEC offer ever does become disabled, you can always sign on to the console with the QSEC offer profile, even in a disabled status, if you have the password. So be aware of this. Now, how do we get to all of these special authorities that we've been talking about and what those defaults are? Because user class is often mistaken for special authority. And all the user class does for us is build templates for us to be able to, by default, set a certain number of special authorities to the user profile. It also does provide some default menu behavior on the IBMI menus. So when we look at the different user classes, we're going to see that with SecOffer class, when that value is used, all of the special authorities are set for the user profile. If SecAdmin user class is used, only the SecAdmin special authority is assigned. And SysOpper is granted both save sys and job control, with the original intent that the system operator is going to be the one responsible for the backups and for initiating and ending jobs and ending the system. The star programmer and star user classes have no special authorities associated with them and will not, by default, assign any to a user created with those classes. When thinking about special authorities, be aware that only that default assignment is controlled by the user class upon either a change profile or a create profile action. Defining users by role and by responsibility is going to be more beneficial than just assigning them by user class. And certainly, as we've gone through this presentation, I'm hoping you're understanding that just assigning a user a special authority because they've always had it shouldn't be a good enough reason any longer, and we need to prove why they need that special authority. Realizing that not only users can have special authorities assigned directly to their user profile, but that they can also inherit those special authorities from group memberships. And it's not just one group, it's up to 16 additional group profiles. And those special authorities are combined to the user profile. So if they have 8 different groups and each of those groups have a singular special authority, they will, in the end, have all 8 of those special authorities. So consider programmatically, when needing to grant elevated authority on a temporary basis or for a specific task, using a program and using adopted authority or even the swap profile APIs. The limit capabilities attribute is a double negative. It's asking you to limit the capabilities of the user. So stating yes means they have no command line access. Now, not only does command line access grant the user the ability to run commands on the command line, but it also gives users the ability to use the change profile command and override certain attributes. So they can override their initial program, their initial menu, the current library, or their attention program right from the sign-on screen. And additionally, if star partial is assigned, they can still override the initial menu. So if all you have set is an initial menu for those users and granted partial authority, they can override what menu you've designated on their user profile to go to and start with to go to any valid menu on the system they have authority to. One of the best ways to prevent this from being a vulnerability is to modify your sign-on screen to only display the user profile and password fields. You can even include a disclaimer on the initial sign-on screen stating a use policy for the computer system. One of the largest impacts of setting limit capabilities to star no or star partial is the ability for the users to execute any command they have authority to on the command line through an interactive session. Although most admins expect that user level restrictions are enough, realize that something that is assigned as part of the command definition can also allow a user to run that command. There are shipped commands that by default, even a user with limited capabilities of yes, having no command line access, can still utilize. The sign-off command, display message, work message. We're familiar with all of these, and users can execute those commands on a command line even without command line authority. The way that they are able to do this is with the change command and setting the attribute of the command to allow limited user yes. Now this can be helpful and useful for valid commands you want to grant access to your users to be able to execute, either inside of your application or possibly utilities you've written. But be aware that this can also allow users to have access to commands that they should not have access to when they are in fact intended to be a limited capability user. The truth is that limited capability attribute on the user profile only impacts the ability to run commands from an interactive command line. There are many other interfaces and access points to the IBMI that this restriction does not apply to. So let's talk about group profiles a little bit. A group profile is a way to associate multiple users requiring like authorities and security requirements together. This allows you to maintain the group profile authorities and thereby maintaining multiple users' authorities. However, when you create these group profiles, there's a number of parameters we want to take into consideration. Setting a good naming convention to identify those group profiles from actual interactive end users. Setting the initial menu and the initial program to a value of sign off and none respectively. Setting the password to none and limited capabilities to yes, as well as, I would add, setting the status to disabled, because the group profile should never be authenticating to your system and strictly used as a tool. Additionally, when you're designating that name of the group profile, give yourself the ability to identify what the purpose of that group profile is for. IBM originally only allowed one group assignment, and now, as I mentioned previously, there can be up to 15 additional supplemental groups for a total of 16 group profile memberships that one user profile can have. Another thing to consider when assigning group profiles to a user is that that user will inherit all of the private authorities and all of the special authorities that those groups have in a cumulative way. So be mindful when you're assigning these group profiles to end users that you're not going to just be assigning one set of authorities, but all of those authorities to those user profiles. Another attribute on the user profile itself that can drive private authorities or shared authorities of objects is the owner or group authority attribute. Now, if you set the owner to be user profile, the user will own everything they create. If you set it to group profile, their first named group profile, the primary group profile, will own any objects they create. Additionally, by setting the group authority, you can allow the user to own the objects they create while still granting private authorities to other group members. Another attribute on the create authority for user profiles is the authority attribute. This actually designates the authority public will have to that user profile object. It does not, which is very confusing, set the authority the user profile will have to other objects on the system. There's never a reason to set this attribute to anything other than exclude. Now, we've discussed these profile password attributes previously, and limiting the device session, the sign-on information. These can all be set both at the system level and be overridden at the user profile level. One of my favorite topics about the IBMI is the built-in auditing. IBMI allows you to set up auditing in one fell swoop using the change sec aud command. It will create the audit journal for you. It will set the default system values for auditing for you without having to know all the commands behind it. Now, by including object aud value in those default settings, it allows you to add additional auditing to specific objects so you can see more than just what's at the system value level. This is true of user profiles also. Now, where most of the attributes that can be audited at a user profile level are covered within the system values QAud level or using QAud level 2, there are two that are specific, one to the system itself and one to user profiles. The intrusion event attribute is only applicable at the system level, and the star command option is only available at the user profile level and will log all commands run by a user profile either on the command line directly or from within a program that's being run. Now, user auditing can be paired with object auditing to initiate it only when a user that's being audited initiates the auditing on a specific object, and you can do that by using the change object aud command. Additionally, if you don't have a log application or a utility to view what's in the audit journal, similar to our PowerTech Compliance Monitor, you can also use built-in commands from IBM called display aud journal entry or copy aud journal entry, and that'll export the data for you. It just won't be normalized. Now, the command capability restrictions can be circumvented via non-traditional interfaces. So I mentioned it before, that limited capabilities of star yes only limits that access on an interactive command line. Your best way to ensure that users are not able to abuse this access is through exit programs. Now, IBM has provided exit points in the OS that you can apply these exit programs to, or you can use the exit point manager from Fortran. And with group profiles, the special authorities a group profile has are accessible to all the members of that group. Additionally, the user's private authorities are checked prior to the group's private authorities. At a high level, the IBMI is going to look at the special authorities first, then the private authorities of both the user profile first and then of the group profiles it's a member of. A risk that presents is that if a group owns objects, all of the members of that group also own those objects because all of the private authorities the group profile has are inherited by those group members. Another way that profiles can acquire unintended authority is through an adoptive program. If that program is running with owner's authority, and that owner happens to be QSEC offer, those users have QSEC offer authority for the time that program is active within the call stack. Ensuring you have an inventory of all of those programs that are running with elevated authority and being sure that they don't present anything like a command line from within them is an important way to protect your system and prevent the abuse of elevated authority that's unintended. At a broader level, if you're running a system that's not at least at security level 40, there are a number of ways that users can acquire elevated privileges. One is by modifying the definition of the subsystem to allow a user to sign on with alternate credentials. Another is a user can submit a job using a job description they have authority to, where a user profile is configured to that job description, even though they have no authority to that user profile itself. They will be allowed to run that submit job command because they have command line authority. They'll be able to specify that job D, and that job D user is the user profile to run the job under. Again, this allows them to acquire or have access to elevated authorities that are not intended. At level 40, these things are prevented. Additionally, profiles that aren't publicly excluded. We talked about having that ought or authority attribute on the creation command for user profiles be set to star exclude and nothing else. That's the public authority to user profiles. Ensuring that every user profile on your system is set to a public authority of exclude is extremely important to ensure that other profiles can't acquire unintended authorities and be able to abuse those. A few other suggestions, things to look out for: not giving all object to developers or programmers, and consider auditing powerful profiles with command line authorities or even any special authorities to ensure you know the activities that are being executed on your systems. And one other note is to think about not making your help desk your identity management team or your security team by granting them SecAdmin simply for the purpose of resetting passwords. Rather, create a program or use a utility to perform those functions. Now, even if you've had this system for years and through many iterations, or if you've just inherited your system, a great way to start is a quick assessment of what risk you potentially have on your system due to misconfigurations or due to unknown configurations that you've been carrying around for years, upgrade after upgrade, migration after migration. Our free security scan has no obligation. It runs in less than a minute, and it will give you a high-level report of the number of users that have some of the misconfigurations that we talked about today and many other items. Some of the most valuable enterprise data is stored on IBM Power Systems today. And one of those I am counting on is yours. There is a storm possible, and that is that the security awareness among IBMI professionals and many new responsible parties for IBMI is generally low. The awareness among audit professionals and those teams that are doing external or internal audits is also very low. And yet, some of the most valuable data for a business is stored on those systems. I would also argue that most of the IBMI data has not been secured appropriately and is far too available. And don't forget about those external interfaces and ways that that data can be accessed from outside. Ensuring that those are secured is important. And again, my favorite topic is auditing and logging and reporting. Monitor and report on those native activities that are being performed by your users. And not just your powerful users, but all of your users that have command line access, especially if your object authority has not been restricted. Because by default, the system shipped with public authority of star change on any newly created object. The systems were shipped to run. It's your responsibility to secure them. Now, if you're interested more about details from the State of IBMI Security Study that I touched upon at the beginning of this presentation, it is available for you to download from the Fortra.com site. If you have any additional questions, visit Fortra.com for demonstration videos, guides and technical articles, or just to sign up for the free security scan and find out where your system stands. I want to thank you for taking the time to learn about all object authority on the IBMI. That concludes our presentation today. I hope everybody has a wonderful day.